Welcome back, YouTube. If this is your first time joining me on Conquering Jericho, I want to first thank you for letting me share your time. See, I know that in today's world it's hard to get time. Time is our most precious possession. And there's a lot of things vying for our time, fighting to get our attention. And so it's a blessing that you're here watching this video. And while I can't say at the beginning of the video how long it will be, I can say that through the shared experiences and perspectives that I'm going to convey in this video, that is my sincere hope that you've found that you have spent your time wisely and that you've gained something from it. If you're returning, having watched my former video, thank you for taking the time to do so. And if it's your first time here and you didn't watch my first video, I encourage you to go do so. Not for any reason other than I believe it'll be a blessing to you and give you added perspective as to who you're listening to and why. Today's video is the foundations of you journeying through childhood. The name of the channel being Conquering Jericho. This is a story of my life and all the different places and things that I've seen, been, the life that I've lived, the lessons that I've learned, the wisdom that I've gained from 43 years of living on this earth as an American, more importantly, just as a human. You see, when we come into this world, none of us asked to be here. Someone else made that choice for us. In fact, two people made that choice for us. We're given a name that we didn't elect, but it is our name, and it is our life. And that life begins at conception. It begins for us specifically the moment we take our first breath outside of that womb and we begin a journey that we call life, a journey of understanding who we are. And so I'm going to share with you my childhood and what that looked like and some of the things that I've learned, not only as a child, but in retrospect as an adult looking back at childhood, both from the position of an individual, the position of a father, the position of a military instructor, and wherever else I feel inspired to dive into. My life began in West Texas, the city of Lubbock. I was born there. My parents had met in Kansas. Even though my father was born and raised in New Jersey, my mom was born and raised in Morton, Texas, about 60 miles west of Lubbock. They met in Kansas and subsequently moved to Lubbock. I was born in 1982, January of 1982. Obviously, anybody who's lived through the 80s or 90s knows that the 80s were a very different time. Things were a lot simpler than, a lot slower paced than they are now. I was a child that apparently, I didn't know this obviously without my parents telling me, but I was a child who decided that I wasn't going to walk until sometime around, after a year old. And it's interesting because the story of how I began to walk, or maybe why I walked, had to do with shoes. Shoes are a foundation of sorts. A lot of us, I know when I was a teenager and even as a young adult, shoes were an important aspect of my life. I had a lot of different shoes, but they were an obsession to a degree. And I know a lot of people that are obsessed with their shoes. Men, women, doesn't matter. I think one of the reasons for that is because it is a foundation, and that foundation matters. See, my mom has shared with me that the reason that she thinks I didn't start walking until late was because I was waiting for shoes. And they had bought me this new pair of shoes, and I guess it had been some weeks between the time that they bought them and the time that I actually had them on my feet. And once they put them on my feet, I just took off. I just started walking. And as I reflected on that when I first heard this story, it made me realize that I already knew how to walk. I had been watching other people, I had been observing other people walking. But in those observations, I realized that everybody that I was looking at and everybody that I was observing walking was walking on shoes or in shoes. So why would I walk without them? I couldn't. I was not able to in my young little mind. At least that's what I perceive now. Obviously, I can't go back and ask my younger self, hey, why didn't you walk? But it would reason that I was waiting for shoes. After all, when do you see somebody walking around barefoot, especially in the modern world? A lot of children run around barefoot. And I've actually learned that barefoot it's actually healthier for your feet. This isn't about foot health. This is about the health of your life, who you are, why you are. And that childhood builds that foundation. Those shoes were the foundation that I needed to begin to walk through the journey of childhood. And childhood for me wasn't overly complicated, but it was hard in many ways. You see, while I had the same mom and dad, I didn't always have my dad around. My dad was a muralist and a very talented one. And at some point in my younger years, being the oldest of 4 sons, he was sitting at a restaurant one day. He was looking at a building across the street. It was an old gray, drab, concrete building, big tire warehouse. Had some windows on the front of it, this and that, but just gray and drab. And this creative process, the creative juices inside of him began to flow, and he began to envision what that building could be if somebody were to take the time to apply some paint, some colors, and a theme. And so he began to sketch out on a napkin what that might look like. He found the owner of the building and talked to him about it, asked him if he could paint it, and the guy agreed. And that was his first mural. He would go on to paint 200, I believe, 200 plus over the course of my life. All over the state of Texas, New Mexico, Arkansas. And that's what provided a foundation for a family from a financial standpoint, something that provided a home for us to live in, food for us to eat, cars for us to transport ourselves back and from, to and from, just like those shoes were for me. But because of that, he spent a lot of time on the road. And because he spent a lot of time on the road, he wasn't there every single day. And I didn't know to take that for granted, or that I was taking that for granted. But I also didn't have the kind of dad that was home every single day to learn how to take that for granted either, if that makes sense. So in a way, I'm grateful that my dad had that, because it did teach me things and lead me into different areas of life that maybe someone who has their father home every single day wouldn't have. You see, that foundation for me was also a source of pain. And while I wasn't cognizant of it, I wasn't necessarily aware that it was causing me pain. It did. See, I would go to school, and the school that my mom and dad ended up putting us in was the same school that my mom had grown up in. It was a small town. And so, like, my graduating class was, I want to say, like 32 people, something like that. It was primarily the same 32 people I started kindergarten with. And I remember the day that I went to kindergarten, and I had such anxiety about going to school. I remember that because it was something new. See, from that point, I had spent a lot of time with my dad. Around the age of 3 years old, my mom, she worked for the American Cancer Society, and my dad was at home doing different things, and he would take me with him on walks to the coffee shop. Back in the 80s, that's just what you did. I know some people still do that today, just in a different environment. But back then, the environment was you sit there and you talk. You didn't have cell phones in your faces. You didn't have your laptop opened up. You had conversations with other people. My dad was an avid and frequent coffee shop visitor, and he would hang out with different people, mostly older people. And so as a young child, I began to experience the wisdom of people older than me. And I would hear things that most kids wouldn't have really paid attention to. And it's not necessarily that I had a desire to pay attention to them, it's just what was being talked to around me. And as a young child raised with, respect, it wasn't my job to speak unless I was asked a question. Or unless I maybe had a question to ask about what they were talking about. And so because I had that relationship at a very young age with my father and his friends at the coffee shop, going to school put me in an environment that I was unfamiliar with. And that can be uncomfortable. In a lot of ways, it is uncomfortable. What I didn't anticipate was that in this environment, I would become the victim of childhood bullying. And that began to happen almost immediately. Why? At the time, I had no idea. But it happened. I would get threatened to do certain things, dumb things like stick scissors in light sockets, stupid stuff. It wasn't necessarily physical abuse, but more verbal threats, fear. Fear is a funny thing. It's also a terrible thing because it'll make you act in ways that you wouldn't otherwise act, or not do something when you know you should. See, we've all experienced and seen bullies at some point in time in our life, whether it was in school, or whether it was watching the speech of a politician, whether it was at work with a bad boss, maybe in the military with someone who was flexing their rank a little more than they should have. See, I've experienced all of these various forms of bullies. And so I know what the face of a bully looks like. I know their tactics and their ways of manipulation, of injecting fear into the heart of someone else to influence their behavior. Those shoes, as a young child, they influenced my behavior. I knew what I was supposed to do. I knew how to walk, but it wasn't until I had that foundation that I actually took the step. I was debilitated by this fear or discomfort about walking without that solid foundation. And as I've gone through life, I've often looked back on those years as a child and realized that there wasn't any moment where I could have stopped it, or couldn't have stopped it, I should say. I could have stopped it at any point, but I never did because I was debilitated by fear. See, fear can be a foundation. And a lot of us, a lot of people, I've met a lot of people, been around the world, been in a whole lot of places. And one thing is consistent: fear, discomfort, and pain, emotional trauma, if you will, happens to a lot of us in one way, shape, or form as a child. And that forms a level of a foundation. And that's when as a friend of mine has demonstrated in his relationship model that helps us to understand from a psychological perspective, who the identity of the person is he calls it a vital base. This is the foundation of who you are, your identity. And those are formed as children. Your belief system, your values, all of these things inform your identity, and a lot of them are instilled as a child inside of you. So as we walk on the foundation of our feet, our childhood throughout life, we often relate everything to how we felt as a child, whether we do it consciously or subconsciously. In 8th grade, the bullying finally stopped. See, there was one point where I was put in a really precarious, really difficult situation, and I was told to basically bully someone else or I would myself reap the consequences, and they weren't going to be good. Man, that really hurt. That hurt me in here. I wasn't that person. I didn't like violence. I definitely didn't. I knew what it felt like to be bullied. It hurt. It makes you scared, timid, makes you feel like you're not worth something. So I didn't want to do that to this other person. This other person, he got bullied enough without me adding to it. We were friends, actually. And so that only hurt me worse. But there again, I bowed to fear. I did something. I punched this kid in the face. And thinking that I was going to gain the approval of the people that were bullying me at the time by doing this, committing this violent act for no reason whatsoever, other than simply this guy looked a little different, acted a little different. I expected to be accepted and included in their group, and that would take the pressure off of me. That would take the focus off of me. That would turn me into somebody in their eyes. I would be worthy. That was the opposite of truth, it turned out. See, as I went to step away from this particular situation, all of a sudden I was jumped from behind. I was knocked down, I was kicked, punched by the very people who told me to do it in the first place. That day, my dad, he was working about 4 hours away, as far as, 60 miles an hour driving in a vehicle goes. I don't know how many miles, so 250 miles or so. And he'd got the call. My mom and him, they spoke every single night. every single night, my whole life. Anytime he was away, they spoke. 6 p.m. every night without fail. She had informed him of what had happened. I think I got on the phone, if I remember correctly. I got on the phone and told him what happened. Apparently, it's just really ate my dad up a lot that night. I can imagine, having children myself, how much it would have bothered me. The next morning, we were getting ready for school. My dad calls and he tells my mom not to send me to school, gets on the phone with me and tells me just to stay there. He's on his way. I think my dad got there in like 2 hours or something. He must have been flying. He got there and we went up to the school, and he definitely did not walk in fear. He walked right into that principal's office and leaned over his desk, grabbed him by the tie and jerked him across the desk, told him what had happened, told him, my son's not going to get treated like this. This is absolutely ridiculous. You did nothing about it, and this and that. Now, whether his actions were, the best or not is irrelevant. What it did do that day, though, is it brought the parents together. It brought the county sheriff deputies together. And everybody sat in the library and had a conversation about what was going on with all of this stuff and that it needed to end. And that day it did. I was never bullied again after that. See, I'm not condoning violence or anything like that in this. It's not the point. The point is my dad finally stuck up for me in a way that I was incapable of sticking up for myself, because I was a victim to fear. Not a victim to the bullies. I was a victim inside of myself, not seeing myself as worthy, not seeing myself as someone who could find courage. I was weak. Graduated high school at 18. I went off into the military. And I often thought a lot, actually, about what it would be like when I met my childhood bully again. See, once we got into high school, we didn't really see each other often. We didn't have any classes together, actually, I don't think. Maybe one. I graduated a year early, spent a year working with my dad, and we were painting cars, doing, restorations on cars, things like that, and just living my own life. Then I went off into the military, basic training, went to Korea, got married, had children, screwed that up, got divorced, got remarried, had another kid. And it was 18 years after I had left high school that I saw my childhood bully again. And in that time frame, I had thought about all these things that I might do. See, I'd become a completely different person in the military. I was definitely not afraid of anyone. In fact, I got in fights. I had several fights in the military. So I was not afraid of having one more to have vengeance and avenge myself from those years of pain and suffering that I felt as a child, even though there was only really one instance where I actually was physically harmed and felt pain. Every other time it was simply fear. And the day that I saw him, we were going out, my son was into agriculture and animals, and for those of you who are aware, Future Farmers of America, or FFA 4-H, he decided to show animals that year. And so we were out at the ag farm where his animals were kept. And we went out there to feed them late at night. I don't know, it was after dark. I say late, it was after dark, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock or something. We pull up and I noticed the vehicle there was this individual. He still lives in my hometown. And while I hadn't seen him, I knew what he drove. And I never anticipated what happened next. You see, while I anticipated giving this guy a formal beatdown As soon as he saw me, his face lit up. Jericho. And he throws his arms out wide to welcome me into a hug. He was happy to see me. And that was different for me. And I couldn't do anything but hug him back. You know, Kevin Hart, I think he has this one skit that he does where he's talking about, fighting and who can fight a guy when you're standing there with their arms open saying, come on, bring it in, give me a hug, and you can't really fight somebody when they're doing that. And that's exactly what happened to me that night. I went on to learn some more about this person over the course of a few years. And in fact, we actually worked together on a construction project for an individual, this gentleman at one point. And I learned about this guy. He went through a lot. You see, he was raised by a single dad. His mom wasn't really around. His grandma helped raise him. But he had a lot of pain in his life, a lot of oppression, a lot of depression, a lot of in and out of, people in and out of his life, a lot of neglect. And sometimes we don't often see that in other people. We often don't see that the bully is really the one that's weaker. And the reason that they're showing such strength, perceived strength, is to cover up their own vulnerability, their own weakness, their own pain. I didn't realize any of that as a child. In fact, I didn't realize that until I was probably sometime in my late 20s, early 30s, maybe. But that foundation can really mess us up. Childhood can really hurt. And it can set us on a path through the rest of our life that forces us to make decisions based on something in our childhood that we maybe didn't quite understand. And so what's the point of all this? Why do I share this? I share it because what ultimately changed for me, and what truly healed all of that in me, and realized that I didn't have to carry around this victim mentality, this victimhood. It was love, forgiveness. As I shared in my last video, all of the pain and suffering I caused other people, I was in some way, shape, or form a bully throughout the later years of my life in the military. Cheating on my wife, yelling at my kids, in some way, shape, or form, I was doing the exact same thing. I was causing pain, fear, discomfort in the lives of other people. And I hated it. I did. I hated it. It ate me up inside. But see, I was changed in an instant. I was born again by the power of God Almighty, through faith and belief and trust in His only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, who came to this earth and told us and showed us the way. And then as the ultimate act of self-sacrifice and love, went to the cross and hung on that cross completely. In some texts in the Bible and other books, it talks about that this man was almost unrecognizable as a human because of the tortures and things that he went through and endured before even getting nailed to the cross. Beaten, bloody, spit on, the whole 9 yards. And he hung on the cross and said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." Can you imagine? Can you imagine hanging there, having gone through all of that, just feeling all of that pain in your body, and still having so much love on the inside of you that you can forgive even your worst enemy while you're in the process of dying a slow, painful, dreadful death? I didn't used to think I could either, but I can now. I know what that love feels like. Now, am I saying that I could endure what he did? No, I'm not saying that. I don't know what I would do in that situation, but I'm grateful that I don't have to. At least not now. But what I do know is the love and the forgiveness that he's extended to me, and the burden that he lifted off of me and out of me and healed me on the inside. I don't carry around guilt or shame. I don't carry around pain from being a victim. He took that all away from me. And he did it through a process that started that night with that man, inviting me in for a hug, smiling at me, showing me that he was excited to see me. And it culminated with me being radically changed in a moment through an act of faith in a God that I can't see, I couldn't hear, I could just talk to and trust that he was going to be there. And he was. And he's shown up every single time. So whatever age you are now, whatever stage in life you're at now, go back, consider your childhood. If you're bearing any kind of a burden, any kind of pain, perhaps it's time for you to do what I did and find forgiveness. One thing I've learned is you can't give something that you haven't received yourself. Ask for forgiveness for those things that you know you've done. See, we've all fallen short. We've all sinned. We've all messed up. We've all hurt people. And sometimes it's hard for us to admit it. But with him, that's as simple as a private conversation between you and God alone. All you got to do is ask him. Father, forgive me. Forgive me for hurting people. Forgive me for being a sinner. Because your word, your instruction as the creator of all heaven and earth tells us not to hate others, to love our neighbor as ourselves. If we hate any man in our heart, it's the same as murder in your eyes. And he will change you, I promise. But it takes your faith. He can't do anything without it. That's the one thing about us. We have free will. Now, I could have walked at any point, but I waited until I had that foundation underneath me. I could have got on here and started a YouTube channel at any point, but I had to wait until the foundation that I've based my life on gave me the instructions to do so. And gave me all of the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that I would need to convey to you the things that I feel inspired to share. So I thank you for spending time with me. I thank you for sharing your time with me. And I'm at 33 minutes now. And so to wrap it up, I just want to say, I love you. The Most High God loves you. And he loved you so much that he sent his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe on him might not perish but have eternal life. The same Son that was crucified on the cross, buried in a grave, and raised 3 days later, and was seen by eyewitnesses of the resurrection power of God Almighty when you walk according to the ways that he told us how to walk and showed us how to walk. And that comes through the indwelling of a new spirit, a new heart that only he can change, only he can make. But he does it. He did it for me. It's not something I read in a book. It's a transformation that happened in my own life. Maybe it's something for you too. Until next time, take care.